Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm looking forward to this next hour together where we're going to explore this question of how might we humanize online spaces, which essentially is getting to the question of how do we connect with one another from behind our computer screens, both for ourselves and our students, but our students with one another. And so I'm very, very excited to be here. As much as possible, I'd love a conversational tone, so please feel free to continue to use the chat feature. And yes, I think Ellen has just written into the chat to try to stay on mute so that we can make sure that there's no background noise. So please, yes, continue to use that chat space. And if you need me to slow down or anything, please feel free to provide some feedback there. This is a new platform for me. So if something goes awry, I'll be looking to you to let me know. So I'm joining you from GOA, and I'll talk about GOA in a second. My name is Deepja Tsibu. I go by Deep, so please feel comfortable calling me that. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Professional Learning there, and have been with GOA for a couple of years. Prior to that, was teaching high school English primarily in Philadelphia, Washington, DC, and Miami, all in the US. And so the topic that I'm here to talk about is one that I care deeply about, particularly as I have shifted from in-person to online, as now all of us have done in some capacity. And so truly want this to be a collaborative learning experience. Hopefully some of what I share with you will feel resonant and will feel helpful, but as well, please use the chat space to share some of your own success stories. So GOA, or Global Online Academy, our mission is to reimagine learning to empower students and educators to thrive in a globally networked society, which I think is similar to what our mission tends to be as educators, and has especially become that in the past year. And so this is all also rooted sort of in reimagining structures. So in the last year, we've had the opportunity to really rethink how we do nearly everything as we've been pushed into different modes of learning. And so that is all mission aligned for us. And so now we're here sort of rethinking our structures and rethinking our systems. And today thinking about how to keep the human in all of this. So our agenda for today's session is here on the slide. We'll begin with a quick connect prompt, which is a fun prompt, which I'll invite you to participate in the chat. Then we'll move into the absorb section. In that section, we'll dive into this guiding question. What does this topic mean? How does it play out? What might it look like? So I'll share some examples. And then in the apply section, I have a takeaway for you to just sort of explore, and it'll give you even more examples and a sense of a design challenge that you could implement immediately. So my hope is that you leave this session not with just some ideas and strategies, but some actual takeaways, something that you're going to do or can do immediately that feels really relevant to your practice. And then finally, we'll close with a quick reflection. And so I'm looking forward to this hour, and here we go. So in this short prompts for connection, like I said, it's a fun prompt. As we go through it, it's a quick exercise. Consider how your own learners, how your own students enter your learning community or any learning experience. How are we welcoming them? How are we welcoming their ideas and their interests? How do we invite them to participate? So I invite you to participate now by first just thinking to yourself, what's one thing that you could teach the group assembled here that's unrelated to the field of education? So this could be a secret talent. It could be a special recipe. It could be a special way that you organize your closet. It can be anything at all. But just think for a minute, what's something that you know how to do that you could teach all of us here, unrelated to the field of education? And as you do, and as you look at what others have shared, or even think to yourself, what might I have shared? What could I share? Think about what you shared potentially reveals about you as a learner. For example, I'd imagine sailing took some years of learning and practice and training, while a recipe could be the same, or it could be something that you wanted to learn how to do. You were able to Google and quickly get inspiration and do it. And so it could reveal something about your level of training, your level of commitment, how much time you've put into it. Sometimes people share sort of risky things, how to skydive, for example. And so that might reveal that you're willing to take some risks. And these small things can share little bits of ourselves. And then in response to, what do we learn about others? What questions might you have about how they learned a skill? So for several of these, I'm wondering, oh, how did you, for Heather, for example, how to train a puppy? I didn't have much success with that. So I have a number of questions about how that experience went, where she learned, who were your teachers, so on and so forth. And same with a lot of these recipes. Are these family recipes? Or and so many other questions. And so while this was a low stakes question, I also invite us to sort of think reflectively about the experience of being asked to share something. Despite it being a low stakes question, despite it being sort of a casual question, it still is asking you and participants to take a little bit of a risk. And so for some learners, it could be very comfortable to share something in the chat space. And for others, it might not be as much, right? So some of us might have waited to see if somebody else would post something first before we post, or want to be the first one out there. And so our learners are experiencing some of those same things, low stakes or high stakes. And so for us, it's just a good empathy exercise to think about, what are our learners experiencing as they engage online? And sometimes when we have fun prompts that we think are going to be big hits, it's still not super comfortable. So in this session, we'll be thinking sort of around the conditions that we can set to not only invite learners in, but to sort of nurture this humanized, connected experience together. So let's dive in to how we're going to be approaching this today. The first thing I want to share is GOA's online learning norms. And we say online, but they apply truly in any context. When we talk about humanizing online spaces, we're talking about all of them. But today in particular, we'll be zooming in to building trust, challenging students, and supporting agency. Since as we've all learned, engaging online or when students are in different places requires some of that agency. So we have to both develop it and support it. So students, we want them to be able to take risks and be agents of their own learning, but ultimately the way for them to do that is if they feel safe and they feel known, and that's what this hour is all about. So the good news, I think, in all of this and what's affirming is that it all begins with the small shifts, and it can be all about the small shifts. We all do this very well when we're in person, but in online spaces, it requires more intentionality. So for example, when we're in person with our learners, we can quickly look around the room and we can get a sense of who's feeling sleepy, who's excited about the game day, and immediately respond to that. We welcome students in small ways, whether at the door or we just do a quick glance around, see who's responding, how they're responding. In online spaces, that applies too, except as we've learned, we have to be far more intentional and proactive and even more responsive than in brick and mortar. So even if we're noticing, we need to respond back so that students know that we're noticing and that we're paying attention. So we can't rely on some of the same informal ways we've established presence in the past. And so we'll talk about those small shifts, especially related to two points. The first is presence. How are we designing for teacher and student presence? So it's not just a fixed learning environment on the screen, but how are we actually showing up in those spaces? And then second, how are we designing for connections, both as people and as learners? And sometimes when we talk about humanizing spaces or designing for relationships, we start thinking about icebreakers, those get to know you questions and trust falls or those sort of activities that are meant to build community in isolated experiences. But what we want to be thinking about today is connections around doing deep, meaningful work together. So having students actually collaborate across different spaces so that they get to know each other beyond just they get to know you. They get to actually work together and in that way build and form relationships. So we'll start with presence, and specifically we're going to start with teacher presence. And for this, we're going to look at a few examples of teacher videos from GOA. And as we watch them, we're just going to watch a clip of each one. And I do hope that the video plays, but if it doesn't for you, or if there's some lag, please do share in the chat. And you'll have a copy of the slide deck afterwards. So if we have to skip, we will skip. But as you watch these videos, I invite you to just notice, what do you learn about the teacher? And what are you learning about the experience of being in that learning environment? So we'll start first with Joel Garza. He is one of our GOA teachers, and he has a routine, or I don't know if it's a routine, but he has a schedule where he presents this Sunday morning coffee chat with his students every Sunday morning. And he has never shared the same physical space as his students, but he shares a Sunday morning coffee time with them. And so we'll watch a little bit of his video here, and you can get a sense again of who he is and what that learning environment might be. So I'll play a few seconds of this.
I think if you look closely, you can see the steam still rising off of this fresh cup. Howdy, friends. It has been a very good week of personal reading for me. That novel right there by C. Pam Jong, it's called How Much of These Hills is Gold? It's a great blend of historical fiction and coming of age.
I'm just going to skip to the end.
That was fast. I mean, this one's just at 5 minutes. It's a land speed record for me. You are loved.
Okay, so in Joel's video, you probably gathered a number of things, but he is clearly coming through this naturally, not doing a number of takes, and in some ways does not seem like he even necessarily knows where he's going with that conversation, but in that way is sharing sort of authentically what he's reading, what he's thinking about. And he does always end with "you are loved" at the end of his videos. And so for those students who've never shared a space with him, they have this sort of comfort in knowing what to expect from Joel, and this sense of getting to know him. This next example I'm going to share is from Anita. She's another one of our GOA teachers, and she built in Loom walkthrough. So Loom is a screencasting tool where you can record your screen while you're speaking into it. And so many of you have probably done something similar. And this just gives you a chance to share your face and offer personalized shout outs. But we'll just watch a few seconds of Anita so you can get a sense too of how she does this, how she connects with her learners.
Hey, you guys, welcome to week one. I know you guys are just finishing up your orientations, and most of you guys are already in. I know a few of you had some glitches to figure out with getting into Twist or getting into Canvas, but I've been enjoying reading your posts and watching your videos. So I just wanted to walk you through week one. Although I see a couple of you guys have done 1 or 2 assignments here, I'm just going to run through everything.
Okay, and in Anita's video, you can see she's actually just showing something that's on the screen. So any of the students could log in and see the schedule and probably figure it out. And so in some ways, you might wonder, why is she going over something that the students can just see on their own? But what it does is, again, share that presence so that students know that she's there. She's paying attention to who has submitted a couple of things, who's had some questions on how to navigate, and in that way answering questions that might not get asked. And so much like we do in our classrooms in person, we show up and we share things aloud. Anita does the same thing in the online space. So you can even build in just ways to have your presence available for things that are already fixed in the learning environment. And finally, for our first set of videos here, we're gonna watch a little introduction from David Peabody, who's another GOA teacher. And he, in this welcome video, is welcoming his students to his geometry course. And so again, just take a minute to notice, what does David share? What do we learn about him as an educator, but also maybe about the course? So we'll just watch a few seconds of this.
Hello, future geometry students. My name is David Peabody. Yeah, in the future, because I'm making it now because they haven't even taken the class yet. We are walking through the streets of Seattle. This is my daughter Crosby, my dog Kazoo, looking at all the fun geometrical things that are in this world. Actually, the world is not really circles, squares, and rectangles and right angles, but it does have patterns and relationships, some of which are geometrical. In fact, look at this. A 4-leaf clover.
All right, so in David's video, he, again, keeps it very natural, not a lot of concern for production value, out for a walk with his child and dog, and decided to create this welcome video. And in that, we learn that David sees geometry in the world around him. It's not just circles, squares, and right angles, but it can be 4-leaf clovers and all the other intricate and beautiful things that we see on a walk. And so learners may pick up on how David approaches geometry, but also a little bit about his style. And also just thinking as we watch these videos that the more that we model this sort of presence, the imperfections, the natural sort of behavior, it can reduce some of that nervousness for learners to engage in the same way. So if we are imperfect over video, learners can feel imperfect as well and feel comfortable taking those risks. And so I invite you, after watching those 3, to just think to yourself too, in what small ways do your students get to hear from you or see you each week, whether you're hybrid or online or even in person, just how are you getting to sort of show up in ways that extend beyond content and skills? And then secondly, when students walk into your physical classroom, what have they learned about you in the tone of your room? So sometimes you might have posters and the greetings at the door and so on. And so when you think about that and how important that has been for your practice and how learners have gotten to know you over your years of experience, how are you continuing to manifest that presence in the online space? And some of this is a loss, right? We've lost some of that physical real estate of our classroom, especially when students are engaging even in hybrid. They're engaging from different places. So that consistency isn't always there. But we want to ensure that we're still sending those same messages of comfort and encouragement and all those other things that we've done in person. And so what I want to share too, that is not about getting personal, but it is about sharing ourselves. So it's about considering and making choices about what matters to you and what you want your students to see. So the quote on the top too, just want to share, John Gottman is a researcher and psychologist at the University of Washington. He studies couples and relationships, and this is one of his mantras for healthy relationships. Small things often. It's about the daily gestures, the check-ins and support. And it's the same in our classrooms. So we'll shift now from teacher presence to thinking about systems for student presence. And we'll look at more intentional strategies just to ensure that we are getting to hear and see our students as well. So there are these 3 systems we're going to look at: communication systems, people prioritize, and check-ins planned. So the first idea with communication systems is this question of how will students connect with you and how will they connect both as learners and as people? And so in the transition to online or even hybrid, students need clarity in knowing how to connect. And so where do I go to send a message? Where do I go to receive messaging and to be a part of the conversation? And so it has to be both formal in terms of what they need to know for class, but also a replacement for the loss of the informal chatter that can happen before class or even during class. Where can that exist? Because that's something that I know everybody is missing, including teachers. And so at GOA, for example, we have a system for informal communication. We use TWIST, which is a combination of social media and email, sort of. It's all kind of all in one, and that's for the informal conversation. Students can share pictures, they can share links to music videos, just things that they want to talk about. And then for the formal conversations or for the formal communication, that exists over our learning management system, which is Canvas. And so students know that that's where they submit work, that's where they receive assignments and the schedules and all of that. And so to support students in just knowing what those systems are, sometimes it looks like reinforcement. So if one of our GOA teachers shares that at the start of the semester, if a student emails her, she'll say, this is going to sound kind of silly, but I want you to send me the exact same message over Twist. And in that way, students get comfortable with the idea that I go to Twist, and that's where the communication is happening. And so it becomes routine, it becomes familiar, it becomes comfortable. And so it thereby gets to be the communication system that everybody is using and everybody feels more comfortable using. The next strategy here is to prioritize people. And that doesn't necessarily always mean video. As we have probably experienced, not all learners really love to be on screen or on video. That can be a kind of anxiety-inducing space for many folks. So what we think about is, how do we ensure that there's a space where everybody gets a chance to share something? And so a reflective question for us as educators can be, in the past week, in the past couple of weeks, have I been able to hear or see something from everyone? So we can think about audio and video as one access point for voices, with tools like Flipgrid or even Zoom or whatever platform you're using. But then also, are there text-based spaces for learners to share? And so we can diversify how students are sharing and prioritize how they're getting to know each other without overvaluing one space over another. So have video, but also have text. And in that way, continue to invite learners in so that everyone gets to feel seen and heard in a way that they prefer. Then the final strategy here is to plan for check-ins. And so surveying students often for wellness or also just to get to know them is another essential strategy. Again, they all fall sort of under that umbrella of student support. And when it becomes a routine and something that teachers are responding to, then learners can begin to feel more comfortable and build trust. So what you see on your screen here is an example from a teacher who shares a Google form check-in daily. And so they're just little questions that students can answer even in a multiple choice format to answer how they're doing, what they're thinking about. And any day or any week, those questions could change. And of course, that doesn't necessarily give you all the information about every kid. But if you think about the time investment, it's a low time investment, but you get to gather a lot of information. And of course, you can diversify how you're checking in. But I think this example is helpful to see how the information can come to you regularly and often. And then you can also build into your own calendar ways to check in. So if a student has shared that they're excited that their birthday is coming up, for example, write that into your calendar so you can reach out and ask how the birthday was, or what plans they have for their birthday. And in that way, students know that you're reading, students notice that you're caring, and the same can be shared sort of community-wide. So we'll now shift to connection. And like I said before, this doesn't just mean having those icebreaker moments. This is also referring to the tiny ways that students are frequently connecting as people and learners. And so things like our warm-up question, if you build in more and more questions like that, we're just introducing more and more ways for students to connect. But we also want to think about those shared experiences where students can learn together, can give feedback together, can take risks together, and in that way form a relationship that supports and enables one another's learning. And so the three systems that we'll explore for connection are structures, focusing on process, not product, and feedback. So the first one around structures and protocols is inspired by Zaretta Hammond's work, who inspires actually a lot of our work. And she advocates that structured protocols can help teachers ensure equitable participation and create more culturally responsive discussions, essentially just inviting students to join in the conversation more confidently. And so protocols are basically, they can be prompts, but they can be structures with time frames for students to have a sense of what this conversation will look like How do I enter it? And what am I sort of thinking about? And so sometimes protocols can seem stifling, but the reverse of that, and especially in the online space, is to think of it as a way for students to have an equitable point of entry. They know what to expect, they know how to participate, and they know how to show up. And in that way can enter more confidently, rather than a free-for-all discussion, which can be awkward in person too, but even more so online and in a virtual space. And so there's a link here to the thinking routines from Harvard, and I'm going to drop that into the chat. And I think it's one of my favorite resources of all time. So I want to just make sure to highlight that. And if you get a chance, that can be very helpful in planning, but also in thinking about how to structure conversations. The next thing on this slide, the figure on the right is Batman, if you can believe that. And this is inspired from the work of Linda Berry, who's a cartoonist, and she teaches at the University of Wisconsin. She teaches a lot of adult writers, so she hosts writing conferences and workshops. And one of the exercises that she shares in her book syllabus is that at the start of a writing workshop, she will ask a room full of adults to take 30 seconds to draw Batman. And I don't know about everybody here, but the chance is of me, I'll just speak personally, having a reference point in my head of what Batman looks like and how to draw him would be very difficult in 30 seconds. And I think that's true for many adults, because what typically happens when she does this exercise is adults draw kind of bad versions of Batman, ones that don't quite look like Batman. And that becomes sort of a metaphor for the mistakes that we make in our writing, or the risks that we take together. So the risk-taking of drawing Batman, again, low stakes, kind of funny, but a shared experience where most people are going to produce something that's not perfect, that has a lot of room for improvement. And in doing that together, can be reminded that when we're engaging in a writing workshop together, we're also going to make Batmans. We're going to have versions that are imperfect, and so we can work together to look for each other's Batmans and to know that everybody's got their own. And so think too on how you can structure and invite risk-taking in low-stakes ways so that students feel more comfortable and confident to take bigger risks as the learning experience progresses. Here too are a couple of examples from GOA. So this is an example of how a structure can offer students access. This comes from our linear algebra course. There might be a time and place for open-ended conversation as a community grows, but even that can be invited with some prompts and protocols. So in this example here, you can see that students have 1 week to meet face-to-face and do the following. So there are 3 prompts there. Students can prepare in advance what they want to share, and they know what each other is going to share with some clarity around what's expected of them. And so again, it could feel stifling, but also imagine being new to a learning environment. It can be helpful to know, what am I going to expect when I join this call? And so that's one example of that. The second comes from a course at GOA2 called 9/11 in a Global Context. And students are going to be coming together to meet around their shared reading. And the reading and the resources have some questions there that have that are asking students to share some of their critical thinking and some of what they've thought through after reading through this material. And in order for students to feel more comfortable engaging in that discussion, the teacher has first invited them to share what they're listening to in their playlist, what's good on Netflix, just open-ended questions for students to feel connected to each other as people before they connect together as learners. And so since they're not sharing the same space, we can't always rely on those informal connections being there, that sort of relational trust that can be built from just getting to know each other as humans. And our final strategy here for connection is the second strategy here is process, not product. And so ultimately, I think we probably all experience this even as learners, that when we are meant to collaborate on a product, oftentimes that can result in inequitable grading or an imbalance of collaboration. the feeling that one or two people did most of the work and the other group members might receive a different grade. All of that is probably quite familiar to all of us. So instead of sharing the product, what we encourage is to share in the process. So from the brainstorming to the design thinking, the feedback, we want students to be sharing in that. And in the online space, we have to be far more intentional about it anyway, as we've probably all experienced. We can't just take a group of chairs, put them together and say, okay, that's the group, now you're meeting together. Instead, online, we have to start thinking about what will that process of meeting together look like. So here's an example from the entrepreneurship course at GOA. Students are meeting together to follow a process together. It takes scaffolding from the teacher, but ultimately results in a shared experience. So here, again, not just moving chairs together, but first is to prepare students with a messy mindset. So what mindset will you be bringing to this 1 hour team meeting? That's probably going to be chaotic. People are going to be all over the place. And so second, how do we prepare for that group meeting? And then the third is actually meeting with the group. And so that scaffolding invites students to really think through, what does it mean to collaborate? What sort of mindset am I bringing to this process? And so that they can they can share in the process together rather than just going straight to, what do we have to do? What do we have to make? And then the component that's really critical to that then becomes feedback, right? So if students are learning together and working together, then there is also an opportunity there for them to share in each other's learning and to support one another's learning. So feedback is one of those natural ways for us to connect with one another. And we can also think about how that feedback can look a little different in the online space that allows for more relational connection. So here's an example from creative nonfiction. Students, again, are meeting on their own to follow a process for giving and receiving feedback together. And if you can see on the bottom of the slide, the teacher has just shared what sorts of things readers can comment on. So again, it equips learners with this idea of what they're looking for, what kinds of things they're looking for, what they can share, and what they're expected to share. And so it gives that permission to each other to support one another's learning. And here's a way to do it. The other thing that I want to share with you is this idea of feedback cycles. How can we vary our feedback? So text feedback, video feedback, audio feedback, there's just a number of ways that we can. And I'll show you on the next slide a kind of organized way to think about it. And just for a second here, I'll share a clip of one of our GOA teachers named Joanna, who is sharing just a fast clip of video feedback with her students. So here we go.
Hello, Domi, how are you? Can I just say something? Your project made me smile so hard. Such a good interpretation of the assignment. And this is what.
Oops. So as you can see here, Joanna has, again, just turned on the recording and started speaking casually. And for any learner to see their teacher responding to their work, that gives them a sense that somebody has paid attention. They are looking through things. There's probably things to celebrate, and then there's probably some things to work on. But hearing directly from the teacher with a tone of voice, seeing their face, can really humanize that experience of receiving feedback. And I also want to be clear that giving video feedback to every student weekly is impossible, but it can be one strategy, right? One, you can look at your semester and ensure that everybody has received one piece of video feedback and one-on-one. And even when returning in person, that video feedback can be helpful because learners get to hold on to it, and it can be something tangible and that thing that they've experienced directly with their teacher. And so the final slide here is,
hello.
Oops, here we go. The final slide here is just a way to think about that feedback cycle. So if you think about a span of weeks in your courses, just thinking through, how have you varied feedback? Where have students experienced all three of these? Student to student, student to teacher, and teacher to student. We oftentimes spend a lot of time in teacher to student. And so are we able to make sure that those other two kinds of feedback are also taking place? And if not, where can we build in more? And where might you just be able to insert a different type of feedback if it doesn't already exist in your learning space. And so that slide can be sort of helpful to just even draw some inspiration and think through how students are able to connect. And so I'll pause here for a minute. And if there are any questions that are emerging or that you have, I invite you to drop those into the chat space. And then we'll move into our takeaways for application. So I'll just take a little minute here to pause in case there are some questions. Wonderful. And if somebody is typing and I am moving on too quickly, please continue to type because I will look into the chat space in a minute too. So for the takeaways for application, I wanted to share with you a couple of resources. So I'm going to click into this slide and first tell you that I will share a link with you in the chat space and then tell you what's in that link. So here's the link, and you might have to copy it and then paste it into your browser to make sure that it opens. And if somebody can do that, once you've done it, let me know that it works. That'd be wonderful. Once you click that link, it'll prompt you to make a copy. And Ellen, I will read that in just a second too. Once you've made a copy of that document, it'll look like this. And so what you have in this document, the first link is just to the slide deck that we have just used, or that we have just gone through. And then 2 documents for teacher presence or student presence. And the teacher presence, I'll click into that, just shares more video updates. And so what those video updates include, more examples of them. And then here at the bottom, an invitation for you, a design challenge for you if this is something that you don't normally do, or if it is something that you do, how to expand upon it, for you to make your own update video. Some other considerations that you can bring to your own teacher presence. And so that is there for you to either work through now, I mean, not immediately, but to work through in your practice, but something that you could implement kind of immediately, even if you've returned in person, to just sort of have these, how to work through your teacher presence in the online space. And then the second link there in this document is on student presence. And here there are examples of how to think through how students can see each other, hear each other, and learn something about each other. So the first part of this includes some tools that you could think through. And then the second part includes a lot of examples. So some from our slide deck, and then a few more about how teachers have incorporated some of these tools. And then again, at the bottom in this orange section is a suggested design challenge where you can think through how you can design for student presence in your learning environment. And so that's there for you to look through. I do want to give just about 5 minutes for you to look through that, and then also take any questions that might emerge. And just in case, so please just take a few minutes to look through those documents. And then also, if any questions are emerging, please bring those into the chat space. And I'll invite everybody back for a group reflection and continue to welcome conversation. I think there's a small number of us here, so if you feel comfortable going off of mute, absolutely welcome that. And as we move into our final reflection, again, you can head to the chat or you just join in the conversation here. And I'd love to hear from you and these sentence starters. I like, I wonder, I want to try next. Either one or more of those. What is something that is resonating with you, either from this last hour, or even just from your experience of shifting online and prioritizing a humanized experience there? The second, I wonder, what are you still kind of thinking about? And 3, I want to try next. Is there something that has gotten you excited to try out? And if so, what is that? And pardon me if you can hear the lawnmower next door. It's very loud here. I hope it's not too loud for you. And so again, the prompts are just any of I like, I wonder, I want to try next. And please feel free to respond to any of those. Also feel free to respond in the language of your choice. This is for you, for your shared reflection. And it's okay to not share it in the chat too. If you're just reflecting on your own, that is all part of the process. It's my favorite permission to make mistakes or be imperfect, especially these days as we have had our own children and pets in the background and so many things to juggle, that humanizing means humanizing for ourselves as well, and granting ourselves a permission to show up imperfectly. I hope some of the tools too, they're just there as suggestions if you have not yet tried them. In some ways you can see what that tool offers and then even just get ideas and use them in a platform you already use. I love these. And yes, I share that wondering how to share more my own life. And again, it's not even necessarily about getting personal. It's about trying to, in some ways, replicate those things that were strengths of ours in the classroom. What's important, if it's important that your students see you as a partner, as somebody who's supportive, how does that translate into the online space? These are great. Thank you so much for sharing them. And I don't know how much all of you ever get to collaborate, but with each other, but it can be really helpful to see what other educators are thinking through, what they're appreciating, what they're wondering, and that too can give us some inspiration. And thank you so much for sharing, because I get ideas and inspiration too. So with that, I just want to share that you have the copy of the slide deck now, and on the last slide, or one of the last slides, there's even more resources. So in case you didn't get enough during this session, there are more there if you want to continue to read or get more ideas. And just want to thank you so much. This has been a really fun hour, and I'm so appreciative of getting to share this space with you, and hope that you have a wonderful rest of your conference and weekend, and would love to connect some other time. Thank you very much.